There's been a lot of dialogue this week about this truck and what it is, why the price is what it is. And I figured after we got back from the ice race and stripped the bodywork off, it's easiest to explain that as it sits as a bare frame. We've all seen it with the bodywork on, and it resembles an old Land Rover Defender. With the bodywork off, you can see that it is much more of a purpose-built race truck. It's a four-wheel independent truck. Four-wheel drive, four-wheel steering. As we went through the design process in order to kind of maximize the geometry of everything, one of the pieces that kind of became not only literally a central portion of the truck, but the front differential carrier turned into fundamentally a chassis node. And this idea kind of came from all the RC cars we've done in the past, where they have an injection molded plastic node at the front that mounts the control arms and the gear set inside. In the case, a lot of the ideas or validation for continuing with this build came from the Traxxas Revo. The Traxxas Revo is a four-wheel drive, four-wheel independent suspension, pushrod, rocker, RC car. There are obviously some packaging constraints when you build a vehicle that needs to have occupants in it. There's a big chunk of space that you can't use. So unlike the Traxxas Revo that has the front dampers pointed rearward, we had to point them forward to get them away from the occupants. One of the design hurdles when you do that is originally this truck was designed for the trophy truck class and score. It's designed around that rule book. And when we massaged the design, not only into a road going thing, but also into something that would be rock crawl capable, we had to focus on the approach angle. And that's basically making sure that nothing is forward of the front tire, so that as you start to go up something steep that's an obstacle, you don't have the chassis and the bodywork get in the way. And what made that kind of hard is that meant that if we had to run the dampers forward, that we didn't go past a certain point here. So you really had to kind of massage the packaging to make that work. And we ended up finding a way to do it. There are a lot of very tight clearances in this truck, and it's a little bit of a packaging nightmare, because when you have a 40-inch tire, cycling 30 inches of travel, and a rocker, and everything sweeping through space, you find that everything is trying to occupy the same space. So we end up with clearances at full jounts that, the push rod gets extremely close to the control arm, and it's just, you have to find a way to make all that geometry work. And obviously with mechanical systems, there's always compromise. You have to kind of say, okay, I have X amount of camber gain, or I have this amount of camber at droop. And with a four-wheel drive, long travel truck, you don't really have much option besides having a bit of positive camber at droop. That's the only way to keep the CV within its range of angle at full droop and full lock. The cool thing about this truck as far as endurance racing goes and Baja is that it shares a lot of the suspension components front and rear. Obviously, because it's four-wheel independent, front and back, the upper control arm on all four corners is the same. The lower control arm is shared on the left-hand side. It's a handed part. The uprights are shared on the corners. So there's a left front, which is the same as the right rear. So it just means that if you are endurance racing and you have a chase team, there's a minimal amount of spares that you have to carry. This thing is air ride. We did that for very specific reasons regarding appropriate ride height for rock crawling conditions and appropriate ride height for high-speed desert conditions. There's other really cool stuff that you can do when you're in the rocks with air ride regarding opening valves between the corners to stabilize the truck and force articulation. When we decided to turn this from a desert race truck into something that will rock crawl, call it an Ultra 4, we realized we had to pack a lot more stuff into a smaller amount of space, because we pulled everything in between the front of the front tire and the back of the rear tire, essentially. So the fuel cells, to package 65 gallons of fuel, obviously, like I said, we don't have the real estate. A lot of people put the fuel cell very far back in desert race applications. We kind of wanted to get that weight central and low. Not only so that as fuel burns off, it maintains the weight distribution, but just the center of gravity is lower. So we have two saddle fuel cells that run down and underneath the floor. And then we have these boat sides, which is a rock crawler guy kind of thing. We tried to keep the weight of this truck as low as possible, and it is under 4,500 pounds for a four-wheel drive V8 thing. And it killed me to put 1/4-inch steel on these boat sides, but that is an area that we all know is going to get massive amounts of abuse, and there is a stainless tank inside that. So I didn't really want that to get so bent up that you couldn't pull the stainless tank out. As we kind of move to the back, you can see once again, mid-engine configuration. Mid meaning engine is behind the seats, transmission points forward, goes to a fully divorced transfer case. The reason for the divorced transfer case is that our EV engine option bolts in essentially where the V8 is and runs a shaft up to the transfer case. We have made all the ratios for the ring and pinion and the transfer case to accommodate the operating speeds of the EV drive unit. The reason why the saddle fuel cells was also neat for the EV conversion is that that is the package volume for the batteries. And we don't have a massive amount of room to run 150 kilowatt hour battery pack. So for the EV version of this truck, the range is not going to be that great. But if somebody wants an EV, the option's available. We can see that the rear suspension is similar. It has a billet central node that mounts all the suspension, the differential, and the steering. Front diff gets cut from a 1,200 pound block of 6061 T6 aerospace aluminum. The rear is closer to 850 pounds when it starts, just because we don't have the rocker portion of this to package. When we were packaging the dampers front and rear, we realized that the rear dampers had to be much higher to kind of clear the engine, which means that the rockers end up mounting to the space frame in the back rather than to the billet chassis node. Just like the suspension components, the dampers are the same all the way around, axles are the same all the way around, and that's just kind of to make it, if you're doing endurance stuff, to carry as few spares as possible. In the back, when you see this truck with the body on it, you see a bumper, and typically the bumper's mounted to a ladder frame chassis, like a normal truck would be. For this particular vehicle, it looks like a normal bumper, but it is mounted to a space frame that connects to the rear suspension chassis node. So it looks like a normal truck from the back, but obviously, as you can see, it's nothing like it. When you open the rear clamshell of a Pagani or a Koenigsegg, you see that underneath the skin of those cars, they look like a race car. This is the same kind of thing. You open the back, it is not a restored Land Rover. It is a purpose-built race truck that has a carbon body over the top. And that is where the design, development, and manufacturing cost comes from. It's for a bespoke solution that far exceeds the performance of anything you can buy off the shelf. We are calling this thing a hypertruck. I am not hesitant in saying that whatsoever. And you know, in the 90s, when the term supercar kind of became a thing, they had X amount of performance. As we know, the performance of hypercars has gotten very extreme, and this is as extreme as that jump. As an example, something you can buy off the shelf today, let's call it a Raptor R. A Raptor R has X amount of power, X amount of weight, X amount of wheel travel. This truck literally has more than double the power to weight ratio of a Raptor R and more than double the wheel travel, or I think it's right about double, because I think it's close to 15 for a Raptor R in the back. We will have tons of videos on this thing going through the desert. A close friend of mine has a Raptor R, so maybe we'll get them out side by side just to help convey the differences. It's neat to walk around this and kind of get an idea of what's really underneath the skin. This was designed and built from scratch with a very particular racing purpose, and just so happens to be registered for the street. So that's the truck. Hope you like it.